So, Brito, when you think about Stanford, I mean, this was a formative moment in your career, really set you on the path that you're still on today in many ways. Take us to the decision to choose Stanford in the first place.
So I started researching, and back then, Businessweek had a ranking of business schools, and Stanford was number one. So I set my eyes.
So you really looked at the magazine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was our Bible,
Yeah.
the ranking. So I looked at it and said, hey, yeah, I'm going to apply to those schools, but Stanford for sure, it's number one. And at the time, Stanford would take only one Brazilian per year. And it did that through the 80s, through the 90s. And I said, oh, well, I'll apply. Long story short, I was accepted. And then I had to fight for a scholarship because my parents didn't have that kind of money to send me to school. So, and then I went to Stanford Business School, and it changed my life.
Wait, you got to talk about the financing to get there.
So, long story short, there was a businessman in Brazil that had a boutique investment bank called Jorge Paulo Lemann, one of the top guys today in the world of business. Yeah. And I knew that he had a bank that would give loans to some of the bank employees that were pursuing an MBA abroad. I was not one of them. I worked for Shell Oil. But because I was the Brazilian accepted at Stanford that year, I decided to make my case, and he decided to pay for my first year. Not out of the bank pockets, but out of his own pocket, because I was not an employee of the bank.
Yeah.
So I went to Stanford because of him. And it was interesting because he asked three things of me when I went. It said, first, keep in touch. Second, before you accept any full-time job offer when you're done with Stanford, talk to me first. No obligation to come work for me. And third, help somebody as I'm helping you in the future if you can.
Pay it forward.
Yeah, so that was it.
So that was part of the education. Now talk about the education at Stanford, what that experience was like, what you got out of it.
That was very, for me, it transformed the way I view the world. It was a very international place in the Pacific Rim, so very open to the world, even in those days. It was also a place where I learned the value of talent. I was surrounded by the best people in the world, pretty much, at that age group, with that kind of orientation, businesses. And I had to up my game. I used to be the top students. I was top of my class in Brazil. When I went to Stanford, I was not top of my class. I had to work harder, elevate my bar. And what I got from Stanford was that in life, it's about first who, then what. I learned that talented people, one very talented guy or person is worth 10 very good people. But it's hard to find. And when you look at Stanford in the Valley, Silicon Valley, that's a mirror image of each other. So Stanford has open-minded, always embrace ideas. Other places look at new ideas as threats. Stanford embraced the shake. So if things are moving, they embrace it. And they say, there's an opportunity here. So they're very open-minded. They attracted people of the same kind of mindset. And I think the Valley is a true reflection of Stanford. And Stanford gets also, retro alimentation or retro things from the Valley as well.
You work, though, now far, literally and figuratively, in many ways, from Silicon Valley, except that innovation is a huge part of your strategic initiatives there at AB InBev.
Well, one of the first things we did when I left Stanford years later is that we opened what we call the Beer Garage, which is an office of ours in Palo Alto. And the whole idea is this. You have new technologies being developed in the Valley, but we have brands and consumers around the world. And these ideas need platforms to be tested, to be validated. And we need ideas to continue to progress our business and evolve the way we interact with consumers.
All right, so let's talk about your consumer a little bit. It's an interesting time, to say the least, in the world. You have a global view. Let's go straight to China, where obviously
big business for us.
It's a huge business.
Amazing business.
And yet there are concerns about the Chinese consumer right now. What do you see?
And that played out in your latest earnings, and investors were a little spooked by it.
No. China for us has been an amazing story. And the thing is that many years ago, we decided to focus on the premium and super premium side of the market in China. And if you look at China, you cannot talk averages. You have to go by segment.
Interesting.
Because it's such a huge market, right? It's the biggest market in the world for beer, for most consumer goods. And when you go segment by segment, what you see is that this year there is industry decline in China, but that's on average. But if you go to premium, super premium, they are growing. And that's where the growth is and the margins are.
Brito, help me out here, because I thought in terms of your latest earnings report, you did talk about consumer demand low in the United States and in China. And from some other makers, some beverage makers, we've seen that they've talked about increased demand in China. So I guess we're trying to reconcile what's going on in China right now.
Well, in China right now, for sure there was some deceleration.
Yeah.
But still growing, at 6%, the whole economy. And in our business, nightlife is a very important channel where Budweiser dominates, has the most of the share. And that nightlife got a bit de-emphasized given some of the celebrations in China. So that happens from time to time.
So it's not
from time to time, the nightlife goes down a little bit, then comes back up. So this quarter was a quarter in which nightlife came down a little bit, and that impacts Budweiser, which is our main brand in China.
So did investors?
But this is something temporary in our view.
So investors overreacted then, in your view, because they shaved something like $20 billion off your market cap. So was that an overreaction?
Our company is very different in that respect, in that we have a control group. We're a public company, but we have a control group, and because of that, we have the luxury of looking at the short term, but most of all, looking at the long term. So we're not shy of investing in the short term, even when the cycle is negative for some sort, because we're investing for next 5 years, next 10 years. So we've always been that kind of company. We've been in business now for 30 years.
Yeah.
And we've had situations in which there is a disconnect, in which the short term sometimes has some pressures, most of which we anticipated, by the way, at the beginning of the year, that the third quarter would be under pressure. But so what? This is one quarter. We've been in this business now for the company for 600 years.
So what's the consumer trend that you're seeing sort of looking around the corner that you feel like people should be paying attention to, whether it's the non-beer drinks? What are you seeing sort of around the corner?
A couple of things. First, consumers are going more and more premium in the way they look at consumer goods, occasions, how they spend their money, their time. They're going more premium. And that's true in beer as well, in most categories. Second, health and wellness. Consumers are very worried about what they drink, what they eat. They want to know ingredients. They like clean labels. And beer has a lot to offer in that respect. If you look at Michelob Ultra,
right,
which is the biggest share gain in the U.S. now for more than 4 years, it's our brand. It's already 10% of our business. Has always been in that camp. If you can work out and go out, no need to compromise, because it's a great tasting beer, less calories, less carbs, less alcohol, and for you to be able to have that active lifestyle. And the other thing is the way you connect with consumers. Consumers don't like to be interrupted. They like to be talked to. They like to be also, it's a two-way conversation. So this whole idea about digital enabling such conversations, it's something that consumers expect more and more from brands they respect, like, and use on a daily basis.